أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم. First of all, it is my great pleasure and my duty to welcome so many of you from so many parts of the world, as well as brothers from the United Kingdom who have joined this seminar. Some of you have traveled very long distances, you are tired, and we have tried to do whatever we can to make your stay in London as comfortable and as pleasant, but as hardworking as we possibly can make it. We regard this as a historic occasion. The Islamic Revolution in Iran is perhaps the most important event of the history of Islam in many, many hundreds of years. So far, the response of the Muslims to the Islamic Revolution has been patchy, often discordant, and confused. This was only to be expected. When an event of such magnitude occurs among a people who had virtually become resigned to their present condition, a certain amount of disorder is understandable. We hope that as a result of this seminar, we shall begin to formulate a collective response of the Ummah to the Islamic Revolution in Iran. This I regard as the major objective of this seminar. However, the revolution is a very complex event. We cannot possibly within the next 4 days consider all aspects of it. It is necessary therefore for me to indicate some of the areas in which I think we ought to concentrate our attention. Personally, I believe that we have been very short of achievements in the last few hundred years. The Muslim Ummah as a whole has in the last few hundred years, very rarely and very seldom, has anything very creditable to its credit. The achievements of the Islamic Revolution in Iran has put a new confidence to the course of our history. If the achievements of the Islamic Revolution in Iran appear so formidable, it is only because the deviations of the people of Iran before the revolution had been equally monumental. As a result, even a little light in utter darkness is often enough to cause us not to see the reality as it is. In the last 5 years, the Muslim Institute has done whatever it can, whatever it could, to try and study the Islamic Revolution in Iran and to pass on our understanding of the Islamic Revolution to our brothers all over the world. It is sometimes said that the Muslim Institute supports the Islamic Revolution. If you were to put the Islamic Revolution on one side and the Muslim Institute by the side of it, you will find that the Muslim Institute will hardly be visible. How is it possible for this little insignificant thing to support the Islamic Revolution in Iran? Indeed, the Islamic Revolution in Iran does not really need our support. The Islamic Revolution in Iran is the manifestation of truth that is Islam, the complete and total truth. And the characteristic of the truth that is Islam is that every part of the truth is self-contained and self-reliant. It does not need to be supported by people like us. If we serve the Islamic Revolution, we serve Islam. We do no favor to anyone and we expect no reward for it. But it is an essential characteristic of falsehood that it feels insecure. Even when falsehood is a superpower, is a world civilization, it has a drive for greed, for power, for profit, for aggression, for oppression, and for exploitation. In my view, if we look at the earliest days of Islam, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to an area of the world which was remote, which was small, few people lived there, it had no civilization. And yet in that little place with few people, the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that began with Adam alayhi salam was completed. And the size of that model did not take away from it its relevance for all time and for all men until the day of judgment. And so, therefore, the size and geography of the truth where it manifests itself are not relevant. It is important for us to realize that history is inexorably moving towards the inevitable clash between Islam and Kufr. All earlier prophets came in limited areas and they had to fight the local power of Kufr. For the first time, the Muslim Ummah is facing the global power of Kufr. This is the first time in history when the power of Kufr has been globalized. And this is the first time that we have a worldwide global Ummah. Events are inexorably leading towards this clash. This clash between Haqq and Batil on a global scale is an inevitable stage in history. For it to take place, it was essential that Kufr should become dominant over the entire world before Islam. Because Haqq comes after Batil and defeats it. This is the pattern, the cyclical pattern of this conflict from the beginning of time to the end of time. And I like to think that you and I are fortunate enough to be living at a time when we have the opportunity, the great duty to play our role, to play our part in the great conflict that is ahead between Haqq and Batil. But the globalization of an essentially destructive force under the guise of a civilization, the Western civilization, is a major tragedy of history and needs some explanation. This civilization claims that its superior technology, its scientific inquiry, and its propaganda about its own invincibility of power based on technology and science is something that the whole world should accept without any further argument. And they claim that Western science and technology is something that the West has discovered for itself, developed for all of mankind, and therefore they should be respected for it. The fact of the matter is that science and technology are the cumulative knowledge of mankind as a whole. Mankind would have reached at the present level of scientific and technological attainment no matter who had been in the ascendant at this particular time. Perhaps under an Islamic civilization, science and technology would have been far more beneficial to mankind rather than the destructive power that has been unleashed by the Western man. However, the political power of Kufr is no less important for us to consider. The major centers of Western power are the United States, the Soviet Union and their respective European allies. Other important centers of Western power are, of course, China, Japan, Canada, India, Israel, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and so on and so forth. Political control over the rest of the world is exercised through an international system of dependent nation states. The US and the Soviet Union also arrogate to themselves the title of being superpowers. What they mean by this is that they have enough power to achieve any goal in any part of the world, whether it is a political goal, a military goal, an industrial goal, an economic goal, a technological goal, or a cultural goal. Presiding over these enormous military capabilities are ruthless machines of oppression. But more than this, each superpower claims to have its own philosophy as well. The differences between them are very superficial and irrelevant. Both belong to the same trend in history. Both are amoral and largely immoral. Both are bastions of crass materialism. The most important point about the superpowers themselves is that they have followers in all parts of the world. And unfortunately, not all their followers are kuffar. The global power of kufr has acquired a following for kufr among Muslims. And this is the point, unless we understand this, we will not understand what is going on in the Muslim world today. A large part of our societies, known as the westernized sections, the westernized elite, the ruling classes, the economically dominant classes, the culturally dominant classes, they are part and parcel of global kufr. Some of them, of course, are personally muttaqi. We know them all. Some of my best friends are among them, and yours no doubt too. But nonetheless, their role in the political, economic, social and cultural dominance of our country is on the side of kufr. Modern kufr has disguised itself as science, philosophy, technology, democracy and progress. Even the non-believing American president raises his hand and says, "So help me God." The fellow does not believe in God any more than anybody else. Unfortunately, some of the fringe of our own people who side with kufr are followers of these people in Washington, London, Moscow, Paris, and so on and so forth. They also believe in a form of subservient religion, a religious culture. The church, they go to church on Sunday. This is good for their image, and this kind of thing even persuades some of our brothers who write for some of the magazines published in London, saying that it is necessary for Muslims to be friends of the United States of America. I think we have got to realize that the westernized elite in the Ummah has, consciously or not, become part of the drive to reduce Islam to the same level of a subservient religion. This would mean the permanent secularization of Muslim societies, the permanent domination of the West, in short, the permanent supremacy of kufr over Islam. In recent years, I have repeatedly argued that the political map of the Ummah has to be redrawn. Once you realize that this map has to be redrawn, it gives to me, at any rate, a great power and feeling of release and freedom, that we can do anything with this world once we destroy these frontiers and boundaries that have been drawn on our map by kufr. The point I want to make, and make it with all the emphasis at my command, is that all the nation states of today, even those that call themselves Islamic, are in fact inseparable parts of the worldwide house of kufr. These countries are an insufficient basis an insufficient foundation on which to begin to rebuild the world of Islam, the house of Islam. They are a creation and an arm of the conspiracy of kufr to ensure that the power of Islam and the Ummah is permanently subdued, broken, and eventually destroyed. The realization that the Ummah has no interest in the present state of the world releases us from all kinds of constraints. It enables us to look at the map of the world in its raw state. The only frontier that we recognize is the frontier between Islam and Kufr. To draw this frontier through our own homes is painful indeed. It is, however, an operation that we must perform. A small amputation today is the only way to save the Ummah from being crippled and from the indignity of permanent subservience to Kufr. The line between Kufr in Mecca and Medina ran through families too. Islam said fathers and sons apart, brother against brother, sometimes husband and wife against each other, because this had become a conflict between Islam and Kufr. And therefore we should not hesitate to allocate the present influence of the West entirely to the house of Kufr, even if it exists in our own countries, even if it exists in Mecca and Medina itself. The culture of nakedness, as Haddad Adil calls it, and alcoholism is also restricted to the politically dominant classes, the civil and military officers, and the affluent of our societies. Only the traditional Islamic society reasserts its deep roots in history. The weed of kufr will wilt and vanish right in front of our eyes, inshallah. I believe that the Islamic Revolution in Iran is the first defeat of kufr at the hands of Islam since the globalization of kufr in the shape of the Western civilization. If the Islamic Revolution were only an Irani event for the limited purpose of securing the overthrow of a particularly tyrannical ruler and his replacement with a more Islamic regime, then I do not believe that it would have been necessary for anyone in Iran or outside to take very much notice of it. If the Islamic Revolution were limited by goals, methods, and application or worldview, then kufr would control and confine it like a fire in an isolated outhouse of a large empire. As we know, close to the leadership of the Islamic Revolution were men like Abul Hassan bin Sadr and many others. As far as many of these liberals, nationalists, Marxists were concerned, the Islamic Revolution was only the first leg of a Marxist revolution to follow. They tried to achieve this by waging a war on the Islamic leadership by trying to kill the ulama of Iran. We have to realize that Iran is still in the early stages of its transformation into the leading edge of the global Islamic movement. The demand that such a role makes upon the Islamic state are little understood in Iran itself. The desire to play this role is at present expressed in rhetoric about the wahda of the ummah and with deep and genuine hostility towards both the superpowers and their clients and agents in the world of Islam. The war imposed by Ba'athist regime in Iraq has also helped to define the borders between Islam and Kufr. The secular regimes of the Muslim nation states have one and all supported Saddam Hussein's war against Islam. And he has been supported by both the superpowers. Thus the war has helped to define the world more sharply for our brothers in Iran. A related problem in Iran is the diversion of attention caused by the imposed war. It is a measure of the success of kufr against Islam that kufr today can find Muslims to fight Islam. The secular regimes, of course, have developed a brand of American Islam, as Sayyid Qutb Shahid called it, and they want this particular brand of Americanized Islam to be imposed in programs of Islamization by colonels and generals who have no conscience and who are barely Muslim, but of course do not take my fatwa for it because I am not a mufti. Since the Islamic Revolution in Iran, this subservient Islamic establishment throughout the world has been engaged in a propaganda war against Islamic Iran. Parts of this subservient Islam also claims to be Islamic movement. Their influence is limited and their failures are monumental. They are, one and all, part of the subservient Islam that took shape under the colonial period, and most of its followers are from the westernized elite, and the Muslim masses have seldom, if ever, followed them. Despite the propaganda and the cobweb of lies woven by the West, its so-called Muslim allies and the nation states, enough news of the achievements of the Islamic Revolution has reached the Muslim masses throughout the world. The Western success in making people believe that only those who follow the West are successful, everybody else is backward, medieval, and unscientific, has, alhamdulillah, been broken by the Islamic Revolution in Iran. Those who follow the Muslim followers of the West will end up in permanent subservience of sycophancy, humiliation, and hypocrisy. The Muslim masses throughout the world have realized that the Islamic Revolution offers them a way out of the dominance of kufr. The greatest political kufr of the modern world is nationalism, followed closely by democracy, which of course is the sovereignty of the people, socialism, dictatorship of the proletariat, capitalism, and such ideas as free will and liberalism. All political systems based on one or more of these ideas, emotions or philosophies, are part and parcel of kufr. This is why the war imposed by Ba'athist Iraq upon Islamic Iran is a war between Islam and kufr. It is a measure of the success of kufr that can get an a Muslim army to fight against Islam. In my submission to you, when we consider the achievements of the Islamic Revolution in Iran, perhaps the most important object of our attention must be the performance of the Islamic Revolution in Iran in its dealings with kufr. No other achievement of the Islamic Revolution has much relevance. The first and foremost step that the Muslims living in all parts of the world have to take is to rid themselves of the dominance of kufr. Kufr will not give up its dominance over Muslim societies unless it is confronted and defeated by the superior power of Islam. The question we must ask is, has the Islamic Revolution successfully confronted and defeated the power and influence of kufr in Iran? That is the vital question we must ask. The power of kufr in Iran, like the power of kufr everywhere else, were represented by the Western civilization. The dominance of kufr over Iran was complete and total. Today, all observers of the Irani scene are agreed that the West has been totally defeated in the political control, in the economic control, and in the cultural dominance it exercised over Iran before the Islamic Revolution. I have neither time to deal with the sociology of the Islamic Revolution, nor to analyze the psychology of a generation of Irani women who have abandoned their Western emancipated state of nakedness for the security and dignity of the chador. The Iranian youth, well known for its Western lifestyle, permissiveness and arrogance, has been brought back into Islam. Iran today is a totally transformed society. The few traces of Western culture that survive do so as residual traces of filth in an otherwise muttaqi society. The defeat and the humiliation of the liberals, the munafiqeen and the Tudde party have also removed the more resistant and deeply embedded traces of kufr in a traditional Islamic society. There is no doubt that the Islamic Revolution has inflicted a massive defeat on kufr in Iran. The Islamic Revolution in Iran is the first defeat of the Western civilization at the hands of Islam. The Islamic Revolution is the first victory of Islam over the globally organized power of kufr. The West has acknowledged the global nature of this confrontation by launching a worldwide campaign to limit the influence of the Islamic Revolution. The West is also a full partner in the war imposed upon Islamic Iran by the kufr and shirk of Arab nationalism. No event in history has ever before captured the imagination of the Ummah as the Islamic Revolution in Iran has done. And no event in Islamic history has frightened the global arrogance of kufr more than the Islamic Revolution in Iran has done. Thus, for the first time ever, the global power of Islam is pitted against the global power of arrogant kufr. This indeed is the greatest confrontation of the two opposing forces that history has ever known. On the side of kufr are all the usual advantages of preponderance and organized and mobilized power, arsenals of deadly weapons, and unlimited material resources. On the side of Islam is the unarmed ummah, oppressed and weak, led by the ulama of Iran. It is precisely this type of victories that the Ummah outside Iran has to achieve against kufr. The permanent domination of Islam by kufr is not acceptable to the Ummah and the Muslim masses anywhere. How is this to be achieved? To find an answer to this question, a degree of simplification is essential for conceptualization. No model of an Islamic society is either Islamic or scientific that cannot be repeated. The whole purpose of prophethood of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was to provide a repeatable model of a head-on collision between Islam and kufr. What is known today as the Sunnah may also be called the method of the Islamic Revolution, or how to defeat kufr with limited power and resources. For the Ummah outside Iran, almost the only feature of the Islamic Revolution in Iran that is important and relevant is the victory of Islam over kufr. Three other achievements of the Islamic Revolution are of concern to the Ummah and the Islamic movement outside Iran. These are the setting up of the Islamic State and its institutions, the transformation of the society from corruption as its permanent condition to taqwa as its dominant habit, and the fearless waging of the war imposed by its external enemies. Let us call these the primary achievements of the Islamic Revolution in Iran, and these are also the primary goals that must be pursued by the Islamic movement in all parts of the world. All other achievements of the Islamic Revolution in Iran are secondary achievements. A clear understanding of the primary goals helps us to prevent the diversion of the attention of the revolution to secondary goals. Indeed, the revolution may even fail to achieve many of its secondary goals immediately or in the short term. Once the primary goals have been secured, the secondary goals can be spread over time and assigned to the Islamic State itself or to the new revolutionary institutions. Many of the secondary goals not only need the emergence of a new consensus, but also a degree of newly acquired experience which does not at present exist. The Islamic Revolution is a total revolution. In the first round of the revolution, only the primary goals must be achieved in a very short time. If I may restate the primary achievements of the Islamic Revolution in Iran, these are: 1. The total defeat of kufr in all its dimensions, especially its political, military, and economic power. 2. The setting up of an Islamic state and its institutions under the leadership of an imam. 3. The transformation of the society from jahiliyyah to taqwa. And 4. The relentless prosecution of the war against the internal and external enemies of Islam. The primary achievements of the Islamic Revolution are precisely in line with the Sunnah and Seerah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. A unique feature of the primary goals and achievements of the Islamic Revolution in Iran is its complete objective and empirical basis. If kufr has been defeated, then that defeat must be obvious. If an Islamic state has been established, then that fact must be obvious. If a society's normal condition has changed from corruption to taqwa, then the transformation must be visible. If war is being waged against external enemies, then this must be obvious from the war. The preparation for jihad or the Islamic State's attitudes towards the enemies of Islam. The second unique feature of the primary goals of the Islamic Revolution is that no Muslim, whatever his fiqh, whatever his school of thought, can deny their validity. No Muslim can deny that the need to eradicate kufr from Muslim society. No Muslim can deny the need to establish an Islamic state led by an Imam Khalifa. No Muslim can deny the need to end corruption and immorality and make the society muttaqi. And no Muslim can deny the need to wage jihad against the enemies of Islam and the Islamic State. Having achieved these primary goals, every Muslim society is free to define its secondary goals in terms of its own school of thought and other social, economic, and political preferences allowed within Islam. In this framework, the wahda of the ummah becomes simply a matter of the common pursuit of the primary goals of the ummah, and the instrument of this pursuit is the Islamic movement. The Islamic State, like any other state, any other organized effort, may suffer failure of policy, mistake of policy, failure to achieve short-term goals. Even the presence of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam among the Muslims did not prevent the occurrence of such failure. This was most dramatically demonstrated at the Battle of Uhud. We must note here that the primary goals of the Ummah, as I have formulated here, are all opposed by the Muslim nation states and their rulers, one and all, outside Iran. None of these rulers and none of these countries is trying to achieve any of these primary goals of the Ummah. In fact, they are all subservient to kufr, even those who claim to be Islamizing their countries. The primary achievements in the Islamic State of Iran, of the Islamic Revolution in Iran, are the output of the Islamic movement in Iran. We have to look for the input of the Islamic movement in Iran. I'm afraid I do not have time, but I think I can only point in the direction of the ulama of Iran. Fortunately, the ulama in Iran represented almost a time capsule. This capsule, the time capsule in Iran, remained totally unaffected by the hurricane of kufr that passed through the history of Iran. And these ulama of Iran were able to emerge from this time capsule, take the people of Iran in their hands, and lead them to a total victory over kufr. What more could any Muslim, what more could the Ummah want? The second most important input is, of course, the participation of the Muslim masses. I need hardly remind you that no other political system in the Muslim world has achieved the participation of the Muslim masses. Each one of them is a tyranny of one form or another. We can take heart from the fact that just as the power and influence of kufr in the modern world is global, so are the bonds of faith and destiny of the Muslim Ummah. History has come a full circle. The global power of kufr waits to be challenged and defeated by the global power of Islam. This, my brothers and sisters, is the unfinished business of history. We must go forward from here and finish this business of history. Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.